growing as the great powers of Europe entered the 20th century. The militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism of each country increased, creating a bomb that exploded into World War I when the Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip shot the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Franz Ferdinand.
Many European nations had grown into terrifying military powers. Soldiers were now armed with machine guns, tanks, chemical weapons, bombs, and even a few military planes. Because countries feared the strength of one another, they formed alliances. Austro-Hungary, Germany, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance, and Russia, France, and Great Britain created the Triple Entente.
After the assassination of the Archduke, Austria-Hungary sent Serbia an ultimatum ordering them to comply to their demands or prepare to fight. While the empire was not capable of taking on Serbia and its ally Russia alone, German Kaiser Wilhelm II promised them a blank check to ensure that Germany would back them 100%. Sensing this could lead to war, Russia began mobilizing in a period preparatory to war. Serbia agreed to all conditions of the ultimatum except one, which did not satisfy Austria-Hungary, and 3 days later the empire declared war on Serbia.
Germany would have to fight on two fronts during the war, but because Russia had few railroads to transport their armies, they decided to take France as swiftly as possible. The French border was heavily guarded, so the Germans developed the Schleifen plan to cross through Belgium, expecting to reach France with ease. However, Belgium refused to let Germany waltz through. Germany instead plowed through Belgium by force, but by the time they reached France, the Russian army had reached the Eastern Front.
The First Battle of Marne took place in 1914 as Germans neared the English Channel to cut off supplies from Great Britain to France. The Germans failed, but the fighting continued as they pushed towards Paris. Imperial forces were brought in to assist both sides. The British called on New Zealand, Australia, Canada, India, and Japan. The French brought in reinforcements from their African colonies, and the Ottomans joined the Central Power.
Because the US was supporting Great Britain in the war by sending supply boats, the Germans targeted US ships carrying food, weapons, and ammunition. In the spring of that year, Italy entered the war, but sided with the Triple Entente.
By 1916, the Germans felt the French were ready to fall and took them head-on in the Battle of Verdun. The French nearly collapsed but were not defeated. In order to take the pressure off of the French, the British attacked German forces in Somme. To take on the British, the Germans abandoned the Austro-Hungarians on the Eastern Front to fight Russia alone, where they were pulverized.
Soldiers excited to fight for the glory of their country were met with a shock as they entered into the new terrain of trench warfare, in which armies dug trenches to camp out in and fire at the enemy from. The trenches were often flooded with muddy water, infested with rats, and filled with corpses.
The war called for mass production of weapons, drawing women into the factories to help in the war effort. These new opportunities for women would catalyze the fight for gender equality in Europe.
In 1917, the Germans sent the Zimmermann telegram, prompting Mexico to attack the US. The message was intercepted by Great Britain and was sent to the US, who then joined the fighting on the side of the Triple Entente. Shortly after, British and Canadian troops fought at Passchendaele, one of the deadliest battles of the war, until the Allies were victorious.
Meanwhile, Russia was undergoing a political crisis. The Russians were tired of the Tsar ignoring the Duma, appointing crazy advisors like Rasputin, and fighting in the war. In 1917, the Russian Revolution overthrew the Romanovs and installed the Provisional Government, which was overthrown by Vladimir Lenin, who promised peace, land, and bread to the people. Lenin's first act as leader was to exit World War I and begin enacting his communist policies. Shortly after, a civil war between Lenin's Red Army and the Tsar-loving White Army broke out, but Lenin stamped out the unrest after executing the Romanovs, and he led the Soviet Union until his death in 1924, placing Joseph Stalin in charge.
As Germany's allies surrendered one by one, they realized they could no longer win the war. Kaiser Wilhelm abdicated from the throne, and the fighting ceased when the Germans surrendered.
At the Paris Peace Conference, world leaders, American President Woodrow Wilson, French Premier Georges Clemenceau, and British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, among them, wrote treaties and created means of keeping the world at peace. The League of Nations was born, and the Treaty of Versailles was written, containing devastating consequences for Germany's participation in the war, such as pushing all the blame of the war on Germany, forcing them to pay reparations, taking land, and decreasing their army to be defensive. The treaty would anger Germans and eventually lead to World War II.
World War I changed the way the world viewed wars, from a glorious and honorable necessity in politics to a tragic creator of lost generations.